So NBA Youngboy is a very important rapper, right? And I like his music. He's one of my favorite musicians at the moment, uh, especially in regards to rap. And I've always liked what he can do. Or I always liked him as a musician, all the way from. 'Cause I remember I first heard of him from the time where he had like a song with 21 Savage. I can't remember the song, but it was this one song. I think it was the first song he had that blew up. It was like, "It's gonna be a murder." It was like something like that, right? But I didn't really understand how good he was until maybe around the time where he had made that song. I think it was called Solar Eclipse, or when he made the album that was on. But for those who don't know, that's the song where he's like, back in that grade, I swear I ain't had a thing, basis I got money, that one, right? And so, but I never really started to more so check out his music until like a little bit after that. 'Cause I think that one came out on an album he put out in like 2018, 2019. All right. And around 2020, it was like a job I was working. It was like a call center kind of job. So we were able to be on our phone while we were like taking calls or whatever, right? So I would basically like just go through, I had like the title app, and I would go through a whole bunch of like different rappers' music, and I would kind of just like skip through. Like I would give every song like a 30-second preview. If I didn't like it, if I liked it, then I'll take the song and add it to the playlist. Now, Youngboy, he releases a lot of music, and he ain't the only. A lot of rappers in, I guess you could put him in the trap rapper category, right? But he kind of operates like a trap rapper, but he's kind of outside of that like Atlanta bubble that had like Future and Young Thug and 21 Savage and all of them, because for one reason or another, particular issues that he had with them, or with certain ones of them, from what I remember, that's why he didn't really like join up on doing too much music with all of them. I know he had that one hit with the Migos that was like a remix of 50 Cent's "Get in My Car," but basically, like during that time, I would go through the songs, and when I with that was when I started to realize how good he was, because he had them songs like "Pull Up on Us" and "I Feel Like Batman," like that one. Um, I feel like I'm Gucci Man in 2006. That one. Quite a few of them, right? That I think is another song he got called AI Nash. I like that one too. Like I pretty much because I was like a master trying to master playlist, and he maybe took up like maybe something like at least 50 songs in the playlist at that time, right? So, and even in comparison to other artists, because the only other artist I could think of has a similar output as him, or who puts out almost as much music as him, that I like, would be Kodak Black, right? And among all the gangster slash trap rappers, I would definitely say him and Kodak Black, both of them, they the best, right? I know a lot of people would probably think Gunna, and maybe for certain reasons they would disqualify Gunna from the trap rapper category, right? But I ain't gonna get into all that now. But basically, though, I still think I would still put YoungBoy and Kodak over the both of them, right? And so, but basically, I want to discuss the reason why NBA YoungBoy is an important rapper at this point in time, right? And kind of from the perspective of like, kind of how rappers are, because there's a lot of people who think that like rappers were used to control, for some kind of like mind control kind of thing, right? Like CIA, like to mess up the black community and all that kind of stuff. Which that could be the case, but the CIA, they didn't use, or let me not directly put that on the CIA, but let me say the American government, allegedly, everything I'm about to say is alleged, they didn't need to use rap music to mess up the black community, right? That's what the drugs were for. If you want to see what really messed up the black community, it's stuff like COINTELPRO and the crack epidemic, stuff like that, right? But that's a whole nother topic to get into. But I want to talk about YoungBoy from the aspect of like what rappers represent, and how a lot of particularly men, particularly young men, of course, and especially young black men, vicariously live through rappers, right? Because rappers are important to black men. Rappers are important from the aspect of, there's a lot of things in the official society of the world, in the corporate society of the world, that black men have been, that's been hard for black men to get through and get in, right, since the inception of this country, right? And it's gotten better over time, right? But it still takes a lot. Like you got to be top notch. You got to be excellent, right? Because black men already run the NBA and NFL. They don't want us running corporate America as well. And some may think that's impossible, but yet again, that's a whole nother conversation to get into, right? But basically, rappers are important to black men from the aspect of, from the time when we're young, the few things that are put in front of us, or the things that are seen as the highest pinnacle that we can reach in life, is some kind of professional athlete or a rapper, right? And then behind being a rapper, it'd be an R&B singer. But at this point, it's almost like, R&B singing has got sucked into rap, right? Because even I would say that's an aspect of NBA Youngboy's music that I really like. There's songs where he's actually singing, right? And he actually has a decent voice. He uses autotune quite a bit, but he actually does have the kind of voice that if he sat down with a vocal coach and a trainer, Youngboy probably would be able to sing like Michael Jackson, right? Like I think songs like on his recent album, one of his recent albums, Massa, Slimeretta would be an example of that, right? Because even at the end of it, how he's just like has these tones like, uh, like he hitting them kind of tones like that, right? I think he really does have a voice. But back to what I was saying though about the importance of rappers, right? So like I said, rappers are important to black men from the perspective of, they they show what we can achieve and how we can turn tragedy into triumph, right? Like if you anybody who's familiar with NBA YoungBoy's upbringing in life, man, like woof, it's a rough one, right? Even like just like how he had to be in a foster home. From what I remember, that's the story about how he had got the scars that was on his head, like something that happened to him while he was in a foster home, right? And just growing up in Louisiana, man, that's uh, something. And not to digress into another point, but from the time when I was young, because my family's from the Caribbean, they're from Jamaica specifically, both of my parents. And there's one thing that my father had told me before that kind of stuck and glued into my mind. I never forgot it. And because there's a lot of blacks who come from outside of America, whether it be Africa or the Caribbean, and they're kind of very judgmental of American black people, or what's called, or what they, or some of them at this point, or quite a few of them at this point, refer to themselves as foundational black Americans, FBAs, right? And my father would always remind me and tell me that the things that they went through, right? Like the whole history of black people in America is not like the history of black people in the Caribbean and in Africa and those places, right? And that they kind of always had to deal with racism. They always kind of had to deal with being under the foot or under the caste system of the society that they're in and that they're trying to come up in, right? Where as far as like Jamaicans and even as messed up or poverty stricken a lot of foreign black countries can be, at the very least foreign black countries have the benefit of having their own society and their own people and people on their television screens and government that look more so like them, right? So versus like it's completely different, right? There wasn't as much governmental experimentation, allegedly. What I'm saying is alleged. There wasn't as much government intervention and government targeting and government basically destruction upon the communities of black people in outside in other countries, right? In countries that are mostly black populated. So, but that's something that kind of ties into what I'm saying in regards to like Louisiana is one of those places. Places like Louisiana, specifically Baton Rouge, and where Young Boy's from. He's from Baton Rouge, New Orleans, places like Atlanta, Georgia, New York City, obviously, Detroit. Yeah, obviously you gotta say California. Compton, the Bay Area. Uh, South Central and all that, Los Angeles, period. But basically, the black people in those areas, that's why if you basically look at the places that are hotbeds for hip hop, right? They tend to also be places where there's a high black population, and then also, I guess you could say, populations where a lot of the stuff that happened in like the 60s and 70s had a heavy effect on the black communities there, right? And That's the kind of thing that gives birth to an NBA Youngboy. That's the kind of thing that gives birth to a Lil Boozy. That's the kind of thing that gives birth to a Kevin Gates, a Kodak Black, right? Whichever rappers you want to name, right? It's the environments in which we come from, right? Because my family, my family, when they came from the Caribbean, they went to New York, to the Bronx specifically, right? My father tells me, right, he's told me before that from the time when we were young, because that's why they had to move out of the Bronx. They moved out of the Bronx to Mount Vernon. He said he'd be holding me and my brother and stepping over dead bodies in the hallway, right, going to our apartment. Right, and luckily those are things that weren't deep in my memory because I was 2, 3 years old at the time. Right, there are people who have never left those environments. Right, there are people who are not fortunate enough to have their father and their mother working hard to get out of that environment so that their children wouldn't have to grow up there. Right, so and that's a whole nother thing to get into, but I just kind of want to go into the aspect of what even goes into there being the importance of an NBA young boy, because people who are judgmental of gangster rappers or trap rappers and the aspect of them being negative towards society, and on one way I can understand it, because you do have some of them, particularly recently, who kind of more so glorify things. They don't give you both sides of the coin. And that's the thing that's been missing in recent gangster rap. And that's another thing that I want to bring up that is an important thing about NBA Youngboy and why I love his music, right? Both, I would say him and Kodak Black. Both of them mainly. They give you the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? They admit to their faults. They're very human in their music in ways that other rappers aren't. Most of the trap rappers, right? And I ain't gonna say no names because some of these dudes, they get sensitive when you say things that ain't too complimentary of them. But I'm just speaking the truth, right? Besides NBA YoungBoy and Kodak, and there's a few others, right? But I'm just specifically highlighting Kodak Black and NBA YoungBoy. But most of the trap rappers, right, particularly some of the ones from Atlanta, most it's just glorification, right? A lot of it's just glorification. And so, but that's the thing that I'm saying. Like, if you really examine and look at NBA YoungBoy, his life, his music, and the things that he talks about, right? Right, and not just the songs where he's straight crashing out, talking about shooting on and killing all his ops, and and throwing cash everywhere. There's songs where he's really getting in depth, right? And it really highlights basically it highlights kind of like the idea in mind, or I guess a question that you can ask in regards to it is, why is there an environment that's creating people like this, right? Why is there environments that are creating people with this kind of mindset, right? Because I have a hard time believing that if when NBA YoungBoy was 2 years old, that he got shipped away from Louisiana and adopted by my family, right? I mean my extended family. I got family members who are like lawyers and all kind of like software, right? Like if for some strange reason he had to be randomly adopted into this Jamaican family, right? He wouldn't be how he is now, right? Now, would he be a superstar rapper? Who knows? Maybe he still would be proper. Maybe he still would be, right? Maybe he'd just be a little bit different as an artist. But the point that I'm saying is, like, that side of him, or that, I guess you could say, his persona that people perceive to be thuggish and toxic, I doubt it would be that way. And the same goes for anybody else in those environments. Because as I said, when I was 2, 3 years old, my parents lived in such an environment in the Bronx, right? God forbid a bullet flew and hit my father in the head, and say my mother ran off somewhere, and we had to like stay in that area. We didn't have no other family to go to. Lord knows what I'd be like, right? Probably be dead by now, or in prison for a very long time, right? So, but basically, that I would say is the importance of young boy to young black males, right? Because there are young black males who are growing up in that. There are young black males who are being influenced by that. There are young black males growing up in the suburbs who have to actually more actively deal with racism and being seen as lower, or the negative aspects of being a young black male in American society, right? Who still have a connection to that, right? And it's important because it's almost a thing where, because he's just raw and he's just himself and he's just real, right? And the fact that he was able to make something of himself despite his issues, despite his problems, despite the setbacks, right? It's something that's very powerful to look up to. It's something very powerful if your mind can see it in that way and not just idolize him for being a great rapper, right? And now, on extensively to why NBA Youngboy, why I messed up his name, NBA Youngboy is important to, I would say, young men, period, in general, right? Especially more so recently, is because, like, I'm trying to figure out a way to say this, but American culture and American society has been a lot more female centric and a lot more female centered, right? A lot of things that men have enjoyed for a while has, been deemed as toxic, right? And like the whole toxic masculinity thing, right? And now, granted, while toxic masculinity is, I think it's a real thing. I think the society as a whole has gone a little bit overboard with it, especially since the Me Too stuff with Harvey Weinstein and all that kind of stuff, right? I'm not one of those people that cape up for guys like Weinstein. Like, no, like Weinstein needs to be hung, right, and hung by a white oak tree, sure, right? But allegedly, I'm not saying people actually should go and do that. Allegedly, right? Maybe, kind of, sort of. But, basically masculinity has really been under attack, right? There's people who talk about it all the time. There's all kind of, even women who are hardcore feminists from the 60s, 70s, and 80s are coming out now and starting to say that the feminism has gone a bit too far, right? So what I'm getting at is, rappers are like the last few of men who are allowed to be, I guess you could say, intensely masculine or purely masculine, right? Or even masculine in the way that guys like Youngboy and Kodak Black show, where it's like, I'm real, I cry some tears, but I'll pull this gun out and shoot you in your face, right? Don't mess with me. So it's like there's a there's a connection that even young white males feel to it, right? Because even recently, young white males have been getting a taste of, what young black males have been going through for decades now. Because since the society has become so female centric, they've reached a point of even trying to put young black women over young white men, right? Now, some people can, I'm not going to go into the politics of it and whether, in a certain sense, I've already gotten political with it, but I'm trying to not go too deep into the politics of it and whether or not it's right or wrong or whether it's balancing or all that kind of stuff. But that's a whole nother subject to get into. But I'm just going into the fact that women have been put on a pedestal in this society. And for those who may be wondering as to why that is, this is something I like to mention a lot, what I'm about to mention right now. But you can look up a CIA document. Hello, sir. I didn't mean to randomly say hello, sir, but this white man had walked by and was waving at me. For some reason, he saw me accentuating and thought I was waving at him. I don't know. But like I'd be like waving my hands around when I'm talking and whatnot. But basically, the there's a CIA document called "Population Control Needs Far More Attention." If you Google CIA population control needs attention, it should pop up, right? But in that document is stated by, because it's a speech by Robert McNamara, right? I'm kind of speed running through this because, I mentioned this thing quite a bit on here. But basically in the document, it says that the most important thing that needs to be done to control the population is to empower women economically, politically, and socially, right? That's the most important thing, right? Now, and I'm not joking, for anybody who thinks that's a game, look it up. CIA.gov, population control needs far more attention, right? And you don't even have to read the whole thing. Just click on it, put it in an AI, and tell it what it says, and it'll tell you, right? I'm not joking. So, but basically, it was a plan, a government plan, allegedly, right? Or I guess maybe not allegedly, because they admit it themselves. It's on the government website, but they know people don't read, so maybe that's why a lot of people don't know. But it was done intentionally, right? The empowerment of women in order to control population, because the idea was that, with billions of more people on the planet, without, women being too busy to have babies, and without women like completely not wanting babies, right? And all the kinds of stuff that you see now, basically the world would be overpopulated, right? Because every woman who's in their 30s and 40s right now who didn't have children would have had at least one, maybe in some cases two or three children, right? And women who have about two, three children, they probably maybe would have had four, five, six, or seven. We got to remember, before the Industrial Revolution and before like the 1960s and all that, quite a few. Just think about how many of your grandparents have about like somewhere between like 5 to 10 kids, right? And then like your parents and stuff like that only have 4 or 5. I guess it depends on what generation you're talking about. But I mean specifically people who are like born in the 80s and the 90s, right? All of our grandparents had about like 5 to 10 kids, right? And their parents had like even more kids, right? So, but basically, what I'm getting at is that due to this control of the population and them not wanting there to be billions of more people on the earth than there is now for the sake of economics and resources, right? That's the reason why, according to the CIA website, that women were pushed to be empowered economically, socially, and politically, which is the reason why you have this thing in America, which people, I won't say whether it is or isn't, right? But, you know, America's I I will say America's racist. Okay, America racist as hell. but but basically, despite the racism, that's the reason why you have women of other people groups who are starting to be kind of pushed over a pedestal, even over white men, right? But so basically, that's what led to this point in time where you have young white men who more so look up to rappers and stuff like that because it is almost like a last bastion for masculinity, right? And raw toughness and raw masculinity, right? The only thing besides that would be like sports, right? So that's what that was like a long explanation, but what I'm trying to explain is the reason why rappers like NBA Youngboy, right, have a connection and an importance of men of all colors, right, and creeds and nationalities, right, and ethnicities, right. So but I think another aspect to it is his, because the bottom line is in regards to like rappers and stuff like that. Rappers who suck at making music, they don't last. Rappers who get too caught up in the drugs and their habits, they get too distracted by that and they don't last, right? So I think it says something about him that he's been able to last this long, right? And that he puts out a lot of music, right? Because he'll drop an album with like 30 songs on it, like, but out of the 30 songs, at least you're gonna like at least 15 of them, right? Because it depends on, because when it comes to his songs, I don't really like the songs. It depends on the beat, really, right? But there's certain beats that are like a little too, I don't know how to explain it, but I don't really like the songs where he's singing too much, right? But like when he's like slow, the ones that are like slow and he's more so singing, those aren't really my favorites for him. I more so like the faster songs, or songs like Wine and Dine, or Slime, like I said, Slimeretta, right? But that's just my style. It ain't got nothing to do with him. I can still listen to those slower songs and tell why there's people who like it, right? And those are usually the songs that more so his like female fans more so like, from what I'm guessing. I don't know that factually, right? But the there's a thing with rappers, like I said, where we like vicariously live through them as symbols of success and a hope that we can be ourselves, be our raw selves as men, and still make something in ourselves, of ourselves. I mean, despite the direction that this world has gone, in the female centric direction that the world has gone, right? And so I think that's the thing that needs to be understood in regards to why NBA Youngboy is important as a rapper, right? He while he did obviously get caught up in quite a few things in regards to like some street stuff, right? The He's still consistent with his music. He did have the whole house arrest situation where he couldn't go nowhere, right? But in a certain sense, it was kind of beneficial to him. But he made use of it, and he kept releasing music, kept releasing music, kept releasing music, kept releasing music, right? And he kind of is a good story of persistence. He's a good example of consistency, a good example of what can happen if you put your best foot forward, right? And also if you have a bit of cunningness and a bit of smarts to you, right? Because something that a lot of people misunderstand, usually due to the fact that these street rappers come from the streets and stuff like that, right? But there are guys who make music just as good as Kodak and the NBA Youngboy, but they don't last as long as them, right? there are guys who made music better than them, right? Or at least in my opinion, better than them, but they ended up dying, right? Right. And so basically what I'm getting at is that there's a certain level of smarts that NBA Youngboy has to have, right? Along with obviously like a lot of these bigger rappers, they have a team and stuff like that, right? But the question can always be asked, as I already presented, why are there guys then who make it to a similar level, say the level that NBA Youngboy was at, say maybe before he made Solar Eclipse and started like more so getting bigger and expanding as an artist, right? When he first started getting some internet attention, right? Like say for instance, look at somebody like TK, right? Or look at what happened to XXXTentacion, look at what happened to PNB Rock, right? So I think when for rappers to last, particularly rappers who gain a popularity as being a gangster or a trap rapper, there has to be a little bit of a smarts to you for you to last, right? Like I think there was a Kodak Black song where he had said something along the lines of like where he said like a some I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember exactly how he said it, but he had said something to the Kodak had said something to the effect of a dumb man can't play wise, but a wise man can play dumb, right? And I think that's the thing when it comes to particularly guys like Kodak, and it also goes for NBA Youngboy as well. I've seen a lot of people online misjudge him or mischaracterize him or uh, make a off the book cover judgment of him. Right, where there's people who assume he's dumb or he's stupid because of how he talks. How he talks is how a lot of people in Louisiana, particularly from where he's from, Louisiana, that's just how they talk. Right, that's their accent, that's their mode. Like it's the same way you know how like everybody from New York talk like this, especially how New York they is. It sound a little more like this. You feel me, son? Right? It's the same kind of thing, right? So, but I think when it comes to rappers, uh, we need to be more careful of how we examine them. I think we need to be careful of coming to snap judgments on them, right? Uh, I think we need to come from an understanding place on as to why rap music has become this popular thing, right? And not go as simple and conspiratorial as it being a CIA psyop, right? Like, no, the music nice. Like I like what you right. And sometimes that kind of talk comes from like racist white guys on the internet who are mad because hip hop took the spot that rock and roll had, right? But that's a whole nother thing to get into, right? Because I have the idea that if rock and roll was a little bit more inclusive to black crowds, you probably wouldn't see that happen, right? Like just picture how much could have been done in rock and roll if Kanye West was a rock star. But anyways, that's a whole nother conversation to get into. But basically what I'm saying is we need to think more into why this music hits us so much, to think more into what it is about these artists that are important and why they stick out to us, right? And give respect where respect is due to an artist like NBA Youngboy.